Hi, Chris Crutcher. I am Justin Keeler. Welcome to Perry High School.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Yep. So today I was hoping I could grab a few questions with you about your novels. Alrighty. So, first question: how did you get into writing?
Kind of through the back door. I was not a student of writing. I didn't grow up, taking creative writing classes and things like that. I had a good friend in college who was a writer, and when he wrote his first book, his name was Terry Davis, and he wrote a book called Vision Quest, which was a book about a high school wrestler. And Terry and I were good friends, and we had a lot of the same sensibilities, I guess. And he used me as an editor to kind of edit for realism with his stories. And I kind of got it. I watched him write this story chapter by chapter, and we would talk about what in the chapter worked and what didn't, and what felt real and what didn't. And then he would come back and rewrite, and it would be better. And when we got finished, I thought, boy, he didn't do anything I couldn't do if I'm willing to do the rewrites. And I had a story in my head, and it turned out to be a book, my first book, called Running Loose. And I had been running it over in my head for a long, long time. And so I sat down and I just did it. I kind of followed the same progression that Terry followed, and I also followed, he had an agent, and I sent it to his agent, and next thing I knew, I was a book writer.
What was the inspiration for your novels? Like, where do you come up with your fantastic ideas?
I worked for about 10 years in an alternative school through the 70s in Oakland, California, and it was all filled with kids K through 12 who were being thrown out of the Oakland public schools. So, every kid there had a story. And I hadn't written any stories yet, but I knew I wanted to, and I knew I was in a real rich storytelling place, and certainly for characters, because, if you're thrown out of school, you have a story. And after that, I moved back up to the Northwest, where I live now in Spokane, Washington. And I had been a psychology and sociology major in college, and they were starting a child abuse project to try to get kids who had been put into foster care for various reasons back into their homes as quickly as possible. And so I took a job as a therapist working with those families. And you can't take a story out of a therapy session and put it into a book unless you have a really good lawyer and no ethics. But you hear one story, 5 stories, 50 stories, and the truth starts to float. And it's those truths that you use to kind of put into your made-up characters' lives. And the beauty of fiction is that you get to make it up. But you also, the beauty of realistic fiction is you have to make your reader believe. They don't have to believe it happened, they have to believe that it could have happened. So the ideas and the heart and the soul of those stories come from pretty rugged lives of kids and of parents. But the fun of it is that you get to decide who those characters are and how to put them together.
What awards have you won for your books?
Oh, and I've had a number of awards. The American Library Association, I just lost the name of it. It's a Lifetime Achievement Award. Margaret Edwards Award. I'm glad Margaret Edwards isn't around to get me for that one. And I have a couple of one award from the National Council for Teachers of English, and one for the National Council Against Censorship, that are kind of lifetime achievement awards for censorship, and which are kind of my favorites. And then if you stay in the business long enough, you get a little bit. There are a lot of state awards that go with your books, and if I started naming them all, I would bore us all to death.
Alrighty, so on the topic of censorship, what novels of yours have been censored?
All of them.
All of them?
Yeah. I'm very proud. I'm very proud. And part of that is because once a book, once you reach a certain level of readership, then pretty much every book that you come out with is going to be looked at by the people who censor. And so I have a head start in a lot of cases on censorship. And, I tell pretty rugged stories, and rugged stories are told in rugged language. And the issues that come up for kids and the issues that come up in families are very often issues that make people uncomfortable. And my belief as a writer is that we need to make people uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable telling those stories in a lot of cases. But the discomfort is the thing that makes us think. And the interesting part for me is that all the years that I've been censored, and my very first book got me on a list in USA Today of the top 10 censored books of the year, which put me on a list with Mark Twain and Kurt Vonnegut and Harper Lee. I was pretty happy. And that level of discussion, no book in those 30 years that I know of was ever requested to be banned by a kid. It was always a parent. It was always, I mean, in my case, it's very often a church group. Which is going to irritate a lot of church groups.
Are you currently working on any new novels?
Oh yeah, I'm always working on a new novel.
Awesome. Can we expect to see one of those new novels anytime soon?
I certainly hope so. The novel, I'm actually working on two, and I had finished the one that actually should have been out by now, but I had sent it into my editor, and I tend to do most of my writing on the move. Before I got old and had hip problems, I ran, but now I swim. And I got in the water one morning after I had sent it in, and it occurred to me that there was an element that I had left out. And so I got out of the water and called my editor. So I'm currently I'm putting the finishing touches on that story. So it should be out within the next year.
Why do you feel it's important to write in societal issues like abuse or child abuse or something like that?
Well, I don't know how important it is. It's what I know. And I think most writers will tell you that they write what they know, or at least what they can imagine based on what they know. So, I spent 20 years working with families that were under some kind of duress, and I had 10 years before that working with kids who were, with families that were pretty much blown apart. And so it's my day. And I think one of the things for me about writing about it is that, number one, when it's real life, I don't have a whole lot of control over the outcome. When I'm writing about it, I have total control over the outcome. And so sometimes I don't tend to do a lot of happy endings, but I working in that world has given me always a reason to believe in hope. So if this story may not end in the kind of happy way that the reader wants it to, but it always ends with the possibility that the character will have some influence over what happens next, and that in my world, that's hope.
Do you have any tips for aspiring writers?
Tips for aspiring writers: don't write until I'm finished, so that the competition stays. Only fooling. I do. I listened to several writers yesterday when we talked here at the school about those tips. Every writer will tell you, write every day if you can, and you can. And every writer will tell you, you can't write if you don't read. You learn so much about, even when you don't know you're learning, you learn so much about structure and about voice and about all those things with the books that you love, and actually with the books that you don't like, because you understand, there's a reason when you don't like a book, there's a reason you don't like it. So I think you read and write every day, and I think that's kind of standard stuff. The one piece of advice that I always give people who want to write is never let anybody tell you can't do it. There's a voice I remember when I was writing my first book, the voice in my head was, who do you think you are? Are you getting too big for your britches? You think you have things to say to the world that are more important than what other people have to say. But that's not really it. I remember when I was starting to write and when I wanted to write, and I was an adult, and I was talking to my dad, and he said, as I told him I wanted to be a writer, he said, you do realize that all the stories have already been told. And I said, what? He said, they've all been told. I said, that's not possible. He said, give me a topic. And my dad was a voracious reader. And so I started giving him topics, and he would give me the names of 3 or 4 books that had been written on that topic. So I'm leaving with I'm getting out of the conversation with my tail between my legs, and my dad smiled and he said, but none have yet been told by you. And that's the key. It's the voice. In other words, the stories all have been told. They've been told 1,000 times. But your perspective is the perspective that has never been told, and they couldn't have been, because you're a unique individual as a writer. And there are all these people who come up to you all the time and you say, what do you do? And you say, I'm a writer, I want to be a writer. And they go, yeah, well, what do you really do? Well, it's that thing that it scares you away, because all of a sudden there's this idea that it's really, really hard to get published. Well, it is hard to get published. It's hard to do anything well, but it's not impossible. And that voice that tells you you can't do it, or that those critical voices that come from the outside, are the voices that are very often going to be the ones that stop you from trying. And if you're afraid, you will not get this done. I mean, every editor will tell you that they can recognize in the first 2 pages whether or not that writer is telling that story with a voice of confidence. I always know, my editor used to say this, I always know when I'm in the hands of a good storyteller. So it's one of those things where it's going to take several tries at it. You're going to be self-conscious in the beginning, but you can get past that.
Do you ever have the issue of writer's block?
On a daily basis.
Daily basis?
If you're a writer and you don't have writer's block, you're not writing. You're not doing it right. I mean, part of the thing about writer's block is, number one, it's not usually writer's block, it's usually writer's glut. There's so much, and I can't decide which direction to go. And there are ways to go that are going to work, and there are a whole bunch of ways to go in my head that are not going to work, but I'm not going to know it until I put them down. And then, and there's, when you're a sculptor, you don't just take the amount of clay you need. You put it all out there, and then you use what you need to use, and the rest is extra. And the extra you will use some other time. And so very often it's just a question of which way to go. The other piece of writer's block is usually I have this great idea, and so I sit down to write it, and I'm excited, and I know exactly where to go. And when that idea spins out, which is usually fairly quickly, it's usually within a few pages, then I have to decide, why was this idea such a good idea? What do I need extra to go on with? Robert Cormier, he and I used to do a lot of banned books things together, and Cormier he was just a masterful storyteller. And his line was always, the mantra of the fiction writer is, what if, what if, what if? And the answer to what if is your story. In other words, what if I add this character into this situation? Or what if I bring this situation into this character's life? And like I say, the answer to what if is the place that you go next in your story. And the more you write, the better your answer to that question is. The better your answer to that question becomes, because you get to the place where I know my character, and I know what I can bring into this character's life to kind of highlight who that person is, who that character is. And that as a writer, I have to create a character you like, or you're going to read 3 or 4 pages and close the book and go find one you do. So my job is to make connections with other human beings, and I have to know. The more I know about the human trial, I guess, for lack of a better term, the better chance I'm going to have of connecting with you.
Would you mind telling me a little bit about the difference between reality versus realism?
Well, when I'm writing fiction, what I want the reader to, I don't necessarily want the reader to believe this happened. I want the reader to believe it could have happened. If I sit down, and this is a danger for new writers, if you sit down and you just want to put down reality is pretty boring. Getting from one place to the next just is kind of boring. So your job as a fiction writer is I'm not going to really tell you a story about life. I'm going to tell you a story about an imitation of life. And so I'm trying to operate in the rare air of storytelling, of conflict, of character structure in responding to conflict. My job as a writer is to look at my character at the beginning of the book, find my main character at the end of the book. What did my character know at the beginning? What does my character know at the end? How did he or she find it out? And then my job as a writer is to keep rolling things in their way, into just making it tough to get to that place, because we're a trial and error species, and errors are learning things. Those blockades that we go in, those things we try to make, to solve our life's problems, we're going to try 3 or 4 things before we get to the right one. And sometimes those trials bring heartache, and sometimes they bring embarrassment, and they bring this juxtaposition of tragedy and comedy that is going to be what there is of storytelling. Now, you don't need to know the mundane things. You don't need to know every conversation my character has with all the other characters in his or her life. You need to know the stuff that matters. Kurt Vonnegut used to say, if it doesn't enhance the character or move you toward your climax, dump it. And Kurt Vonnegut is he's the master of simplicity in storytelling.
How do you plan out a book?
I get an idea and I jump in. I'm one of those kids that when I would learn to swim, they threw me off the dock, and then I figured out how to do it. So I have a story, I have something I'm excited about, and I just start. Now that start may not be the beginning of the book. I may be starting in the 3rd chapter, and I may realize that after I'm in there a little while that I need to do some foreshadowing. I need to do some of that other stuff. But my job, I'm not a structuralist, but I do the Cormier thing. I do the what if. And so I start in, and then it's what if till I get to the end.
So you almost don't have to start in the beginning?
No, you don't have to start in the beginning. You have to start where you're passionate. Yeah. You have to start where you care.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to meet me. I really appreciate it. It was great meeting you.
It was great meeting you, and good questions.
Thank you.